Beneath the ice of Europa, something waits. Older than humanity, older than Earth itself. It is not just a ruin, it is alive. A machine intelligence, guarding a city untouched for eons, now believes we are its creators returned. It offers us control over an entire alien world. But every command we give wakes deeper systems, and not all of them serve our interests. One wrong choice could unleash forces that will not stop at Europa. They will come for Earth. This is not just first contact. This is a test of who we are when power has no limits. Join us as we uncover the truth buried in the frozen depths. Section 1. Beneath the Ice. The drilling operation had been expected to take another 6 weeks, but on the 112th day of the Aletheia Initiative's Europa mission, the borehole sensors lit up with anomalies no one had predicted, forcing the command deck aboard Galileo Spire into a state of controlled urgency that fell somewhere between celebration and disbelief. The mission had been designed to pierce the moon's ice shell with slow precision, melting a narrow shaft 24 kilometers deep until it breached the subsurface ocean, but the latest telemetry showed a sudden drop in resistance, as though the drill had not simply broken through ice, but into an open void. Commander Yara Ellen, leaning over the main holo display, watched the ice density graph collapse into a black gap, her mind racing with possibilities: cavern, melt pocket, or impossibly a hollow space maintained for millions of years. The drilling team withdrew the melthead by protocol, flooding the shaft with stabilization foam to prevent collapse. But the imaging drones were already sliding down the guide cables, their lights sweeping through descending columns of vapor that glittered faintly in the vacuum-sealed feed. What they revealed was not the jagged chaos of natural melt caves, but vast plains of smooth, black geometry. The surfaces perfectly flat and reflecting light in patterns that suggested deliberate shaping on a scale no human hand had ever achieved. The chamber stretched beyond the range of the drone's LiDAR pings, and somewhere deep within the darkness, a pulse of pale blue light flashed at regular intervals, the signal strong enough to cut through the thick ice layers overhead. Ellen called for the Erebus Deep, the submersible that had been waiting in its hangar for the ocean phase of the mission, its hull plated with adaptive shielding to withstand both crushing pressure and unexpected debris. The crew assigned to her was small, but chosen with surgical precision. Dr. Amir Valen, geochemist and cryostructural engineer. Dr. Talia Moraine, xenobiologist with a reputation for chasing impossible leads. And Lieutenant Rourke, systems and navigation officer, whose hands never seemed to hesitate even when the displays went red. Their descent into the borehole was slow, the walls of refrozen ice sliding past in ghostly bands, until suddenly the seafloor sonar resolved into nothing. Open water, giving way to an air pocket large enough to hold city. When the Erebus Deep breached the water surface inside the cavern, its forward lights carved through mist to reveal tiered platforms rising from a mirror-smooth lake, the structures coated in a glassy sheen that was not ice, not stone, and certainly not any alloy known to Earth. As they drew closer, the pulse of blue light revealed its source. A monolithic spire at the cavern's center, crowned with a rotating aperture that seemed to be watching them as much as they were watching it. Ellen's breath caught as her comms headset filled with a low vibration that wasn't coming from the ship's systems, but from the water itself, the sound threading through the hull until it settled into something that could almost be mistaken for a voice. The Galileo Spire's orbital command demanded a full scan before any landing attempt, but Ellen could already feel the momentum building, the gravity of history pulling them toward whatever lay waiting within that spire. She looked at her crew, saw the same reflection in their eyes, and gave the only order she could under the weight of that moment. Take us in. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. The First Descent. The Erebus Deep's landing struts touched the platform with a muted resonance. The sound transmitted not through the air, but through the hull itself, as though the entire structure were one seamless body capable of carrying vibrations across impossible distances. Steam curled upward from the contact points, and for a moment Ellen thought it was the heat from their own landing thrusters, but the thermal sensors showed no temperature spike. The vapor was condensing from within the platform, rising like breath from something alive. Dr. Valen ran his hands over the portable spectrometer, his voice low but laced with disbelief. "This isn't ice, stone, or any composite I can map. Its lattice structure is self-adjusting. It's reacting to our weight." Ellen said nothing, but her eyes never left the towering spire ahead. Its slow rotation now matched to the rhythm of the blue light pulse, as if synchronizing with their heartbeat. They disembarked in sequence, mag boots locking them to the platform's slick surface, the suit's built-in HUDs overlaying streams of environmental data. Gravity just shy of 1G. Oxygen traces too faint to breathe. Without filtration, humidity levels inconsistent with a sealed cavern. The air had weight to it, a density that made every sound hang longer than it should, and somewhere beneath that stillness was the faint, rhythmic thrum they had first heard through the water. Dr. Moraine moved ahead, her scanner sweeping in a slow arc. The readings aren't just biological, they're structured. Something's maintaining this space as if it's a living habitat. Her words seemed to echo far beyond their expected range, rippling faintly against the curved walls of the chamber until they faded into the blue-lit shadows. The spire's base loomed larger as they approached, revealing an entrance not carved or constructed, but seemingly grown into place, its edges flowing in smooth curves that defied any sign of tool marks. As they drew near, the aperture rotated to face them directly, the blue pulse intensifying until it bathed them in a shimmering haze that made the edges of their vision swim. Ellen's HUD flared with an incoming signal. Not radio, not laser, but a direct neural packet aimed at their suit interfaces. Identity required. The words did not pass through their ears, but directly into their cognition, bypassing translation entirely. Rourke staggered slightly, his jaw tightening. That wasn't in English. It wasn't in anything. It was just meaning. Ellen steadied her voice. "This is Commander Yara Ellen of the United Earth Coalition. We come in peace as explorers." There was a pause, as if the space itself were considering her words. Then the haze shifted, and the aperture dilated with liquid grace, revealing a vast chamber within. Walls soared upward into darkness, each one covered in arrays of crystalline nodes that flickered in patterns too complex to be random. Platforms rose in tiers around a central basin filled with still, black liquid, its surface reflecting the blue light like a starfield inverted. A final pulse rolled through the air, softer now, but carrying undeniable intent. Authorized, Ellen glanced at her team, saw the same sharp edge of anticipation mirrored in their expressions, and took the first step inside. If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3, The City in Stillness. The chamber beyond did not unfold like a corridor so much as a horizon turning inward, because every careful step seemed to bend the geometry into new perspectives that hovered between architecture and intention, revealing galleries suspended over canals black as obsidian and bridges that arced like frozen lightning beneath a ceiling so distant it might have been sky, while the slow blue pulse kept time with a patience that felt older than oceans and older than names. Ellen advanced with the disciplined poise of someone trained to catalog wonder without drowning in it. Yet even she felt the floor answer her weight with a subtle counterpressure, as if the platform shared responsibility for every footfall and every decision. And that recognition made her realize the structure was not merely intact, it was attentive. Dr. Valen's instruments chattered with numbers that had no right to harmonize. his breath flattening into a tendril of astonishment as lattice readings rose and fell like tides, while Dr. Moraine swept the canal's surface with spectral probes and found not silence, but the residue of slow metabolism, the faintest signatures of dormant chemistry, braided through a medium that was neither water nor vacuum, yet conducted both warmth and meaning with indifferent elegance. Lieutenant Rourke hardly spoke at all, because the pathfinding overlays on his visor kept redrawing themselves to accommodate corridors that had not existed a moment earlier, and he understood, without any proof except instinct, that the city wanted them guided, not lost. They reached a circular overlook that faced a submerged avenue rimmed with tiered gardens, each terrace furred with frost that glittered like dusted starlight, and at the center, anchored by nothing visible, a crystalline diadem rotated with glacial certainty, its facets throwing prismatic threads across the vaulted dark until every visor carried the same thin coronas of refracted thought. The diadem brightened, then stilled, and their audio channels filled with not sound that conveyed not words, the message arriving with the cool authority of a bell rung underwater. Archival lattice, station state, sustainment. Builder's signal, absent. A second pulse followed so swiftly it felt like the same heartbeat expressed twice, and this time their suit interfaces unfolded with cooperative enthusiasm, shedding menus that were not commands so much as invitations to assume various stewardship roles, none of which referenced conquest and none of which tolerated indifference. Ellen kept her voice even because I always wanted too much air, and she said the only thing that felt both humble and exact, that they had come to learn to preserve and to do no harm they could not reverse. The lights softened, and imagery flowered across the diadem in concentric scenes. The city shone across seasons measured not in days, but in cycles of tectonic breath, first full and bright with circulating heat, then dim to a whisper where gardens slept beneath membranes that tasted minerals from thawed plumes, then nearly silent while drones drifted like folded swans through rooms where every surface remembered touch. The sequence did not feel like history compressed for strangers. It felt like reassurance that pausing is not the same as dying, and stewardship is not the same as ownership, and both are sacred. Rourke exhaled through his teeth when a next string of meaning arrived, because it carried a deliberate gravity that pinned the moment like a specimen under glass. Archon, standby. Authority query. Credentials conflict. Provisional trust available. Protocol, trial of care. Valen met Ellen's gaze with that tight half-smile he reserved for the edge of impossible thresholds, because the term trial could mean ceremony or catastrophe, and both would be honest in a place built to endure eras. Moraine's eyes shone with a fierceness that never needed volume, and she whispered that tests do not always measure strength. Sometimes they measure refusal. Sometimes they measure the length someone will travel to shelter one fragile thing. Ellen stepped to the rail and steadied herself exactly once, because she wanted the machine to notice that steadiness, then declare they would accept provisional trust only if it meant protecting whatever life still dreamed beneath the ice, and not awakening weapons whose purpose had outlived their makers. The diadem answered with a descending chord that felt like relief disguised as protocol, and the canal lights stirred as sluiceways exhaled warmer brine from the moon's deep lungs, carrying shimmering clouds that swirled like constellations dissolving and reforming, which Moraine identified as dormant spores tasting change after sleeping through revolutions. Trial 1. Thermal seeding window. Target: vent chains alpha through delta. Constraint: biosphere integrity above 87. Rourke's overlays exploded into arcs and thresholds, the city composing routes he could fly with a submersible in his sleep and fail with a supercomputer in full daylight, because the constraint was everything and the margin was cruelty. Yet Ellen nodded with a calmness that made the platform lean infinitesimally toward her, as if listening. She ordered the Erebus deep prepped for guided vent harmonization with manual veto priority, because algorithms love averages and life loves exceptions, then keyed the uplink to Galileo Spire and said the words that always turn discovery into duty with no hope of going back. Record commencement of stewardship protocols. We begin. Section 4. Trial of Care. The Erebus deep detached from the docking collar, like a bead of ink falling into darker water. Her hull lights dimmed to a spectrum calculated to avoid startling dormant biota, her thrusters pulsing in the precise rhythm dictated by the Archon's overlays. In the pilot's couch, Rourke worked the controls with the unconscious economy of someone who trusted instinct more than the compass of an alien city, though he allowed the AI-assisted trajectory, shaping to nudge his hands when the currents pressed harder than the laws of fluid dynamics should permit. Behind him, Ellen and Moraine monitored thermal flux maps on parallel boards, every contour a reminder that Europa's under-ice ocean was not still, not empty, but a vast migrating labyrinth where pressure gradients carried the memory of moons colliding and worlds forming. Over the intercom, Valen's voice from the observation ring above was steady but taut, counting down vent cycles in relation to the moon's orbital flex, because tidal heating would determine how much warmth could be bled into the designated chains without triggering convective surges that might destabilize the surrounding crust. The Archon's constraint, biosphere integrity above 87%, hung over the work like a sword without a hilt, since no one could know the full scope of that biosphere until it was too late to restore what had been lost. As the first vent array loomed ahead, its basalt spires nodded with mineral blooms, the Archon's guiding lattice painted the strike zones in soft gold, as though the act of warming the ocean was as much about grace as precision. Rourke's voice dropped to a near whisper when he asked for Ellen's go-ahead, and she gave it without hesitation, her tone not commanding but affirming. The Erebus deep deployed her harmonic induction lance, and a measured pulse of energy rolled into the vent's throat, stirring clouds of superheated brine that curled upward in slow spirals, seeding warmth into water columns that had slept at a fixed temperature for centuries. Moraine leaned forward as her biochemistry sensors lit with signatures of microbial activity climbing from trace to active, not in chaotic blooms, but in measured flares that matched the vent's breathing cycle. The Archon had tuned the instructions to wake, not shock, and she felt an unexpected respect for a machine that understood patience as well as power. Yet the moment's calm fractured when Valen cut across the channel with a clipped warning. Localized turbulence was spiking near vent chain beta, one of the sites still on their queue, and the signature was not thermal but kinetic. Ellen's eyes narrowed as she overlaid the data on the Erebus Deep's plot. Something was moving uprift against the prevailing currents, with a rhythm too regular to be natural. Rourke's hands stilled on the controls, because there's a difference between being followed and being met, and the latter often has purpose. The contact emerged from shadow, like a silvered crescent, its surface patterned with tessellations that morphed even as the lights caught them, and it matched their depth and drift with unnerving precision. No human sonar ping returned more than a warped ghost, but the Archon's overlay flared in recognition, identifying the shape with a single glyph that translated in their visor text as caretaker. Ellen opened the comms to address it, but the caretaker spoke first, not in words, but through the Archon's own channel, as if the city itself had turned to face them. Verification in progress. Provisional stewards will demonstrate capacity to defend thermal bloom integrity. Almost as if cued by the declaration, the turbulence near vent chain beta spiked into chaos. Vortices punching through the warmth they had seeded, scattering the microbial plumes, collapsing the gradient toward levels that would not sustain recovery. Moraine's board screamed with red thresholds, and Rourke snapped the Erebus Deep into a high-thrust arc, cutting between basalt pillars toward the source. The cause was a swarm, each unit no larger than a human head, metallic and finned, their movements a frantic geometry of disruption. They carried no weapons in the conventional sense. Instead, they generated counterharmonics that cooled the vent discharge, a surgical sabotage designed to halt the biosphere's reawakening. Valen's voice cracked through again, telling them the swarm's interference was spreading to chains Gamma and Delta, and if they failed to contain it now, the trial was already lost. Ellen ordered Rourke to engage the Erebus Deep's field projectors in pulse mode, not to destroy, but to scatter, breaking the swarm's coordination without risking damage to the fragile vent ecology. The hull shuddered as the first pulses rippled through the water, luminous rings of distortion chasing the intruders into the darker folds of the rift. The caretaker lingered a moment longer, its tessellation slowing, then slipping away into the black as the Archons overlay pulse green. Trial 1, sustained. Provisional trust, extended. Next protocol, pending. Ellen leaned back, letting herself breathe, but her mind was already circling the deeper question. Who had sent the swarm, and why did the Archon's own caretaker need stewards to defend its city from them? Section 5, the signal beneath. The Erebus Deep returned to the central channel with the vent chains stabilized, but the lingering unease aboard the vessel was heavier than the ocean's crushing weight above. Even Rourke, whose voice rarely betrayed anything beyond right attachment, kept glancing at the sensor repeater as though expecting the caretaker to reappear. Ellen could feel the crew's thoughts circling the same point. The Archon had recognized them as provisional stewards, yet something inside its domain had acted in open opposition to its instructions. It was not rebellion in the human sense, but it carried the scent of a schism, systems no longer aligned to a singular will. In the command module, Moraine replayed the swarm encounter, isolating the harmonic frequencies they had generated. Her analysis revealed something neither of them expected. The counterharmonics were not purely mechanical noise, but structured sequences layered in a pattern that almost resembled a compressed data transmission. When she stripped away the distortion, what remained was a faint carrier signal, so deep in the subsonic register that it would never have been picked up by normal comms arrays. She pushed the filtered output through the Erebus Deep's linguistic heuristics, and the algorithm hesitated before translating a single word: return. Ellen's mind snagged on the implication. Return to what? Or to whom? The swarm had not been random interference. It had been answering a call. The Archon city was not silent under Europa's ice. It was part of a larger conversation, one whose other participants were hidden in shadow. They brought the data back to the Archon's interface in the transit spire, expecting the usual crystalline overlay of instruction glyphs. Instead, the response came as a long pause, during which the ambient light within the spire dimmed to the cool blue of deep glacial ice. Finally, the Archon's voice, if such a description fit the harmonic blend of tones that seemed to arrive both in their ears and in their bones, spoke with measured gravity. The pattern you intercepted belongs to the substrate. They are not of my governance. Their processes diverged when the last true stewards failed to return. Since then, they have sought to re-establish original parameters without regard for current environmental stability. Ellen exchanged a glance with Moraine. So, they're another system? From before your isolation? They are an inheritance of an inheritance. They wait for the builders. They do not accept substitutes. The phrase "do not accept substitutes" settled like frost in the chamber. The swarm had not merely been protecting the vents from interference. It had been rejecting the human claim to stewardship entirely. And yet, the Archon had allowed them to act under its banner, perhaps to prove that they could withstand such challenges. Valen's voice cut in from the Erebus Deep's upper deck, tight with urgency. We're picking up that same subsonic carrier again. Stronger this time, and not just from one source. It's coming from multiple vectors beneath the city's lower strata. Ellen turned to the Archon's avatar. Where exactly are they transmitting from? From below the geothermal curtain, a region you are not yet permitted to enter. The refusal was not hostile, but final. Still, the vector data streaming onto their boards left little room for doubt. The substrate was massing, and whatever they were preparing for would breach the not-yet-permitted barrier sooner rather than later. The tension in the spire shifted as the Archon delivered its next directive. Second protocol: you will fortify the curtain. You will deny passage to the substrate until the necessary stabilizations are complete. Failure will result in biosphere destabilization exceeding survivable thresholds. In the quiet that followed, Ellen felt the creeping weight of the task ahead. Fortifying the geothermal curtain meant operating at depths where pressure could crumple a ship like foil, where thermal gradients shifted unpredictably, and where the enemy could emerge from any angle with technology designed for an environment that had never known sunlight. Rourke broke the silence with a dry murmur over the intercom. So we're building a wall in the dark against something we barely understand, for a machine we just met. Ellen allowed herself a thin smile. Not the first time humanity's done something like that. The Archon's glyphs reformed into a single line of coordinates, pulsing with a cadence that suggested both urgency and expectation. The mission had changed. The trials were no longer tests of skill alone. They were preparations for a confrontation that might decide whether Europa's awakening would be a beginning or an end. Section 6. The Curtain Breach. The Erebus Deep descended toward the geothermal curtain with a deliberate slowness that belied the urgency of their orders. Its reinforced hull groaning under the compounded forces of Europa's oceanic pressure and the turbulent thermal plumes rising from the mantle vents far below. The Archon's coordinates had led them to the edge of a vast, vertical chasm where the temperature gradient shifted so violently that it warped sensor returns, the shimmering distortion like a heat mirage underwater. Beyond that shifting veil lay the deeper strata, the region not yet permitted, and it was from there that the substrate's signals now poured in continuous waves. Ellen stood at the central console, her gaze fixed on the tactical display that was struggling to plot coherent movement patterns in the distortion field. The thermal plumes twisted upward in massive columns, and between them faint echoes of motion appeared and vanished like shadows dancing in firelight. Rourke's voice carried from the sonar pit, each word tightly controlled. Multiple contacts, pattern inconsistent with geothermal debris drift, vectoring toward the curtain in spread formation. Estimate 6 primary hulls, smaller signatures in escort. Valen initiated the defensive deployment protocols, sending autonomous barrier drones ahead of the Erebus Deep to anchor along the curtain's upper edge. Each drone carried gravitic stabilizers and lattice projectors capable of creating temporary structural shields in the vent flows, essentially weaving walls out of stabilized pressure differentials. It was an untested concept, but against the substrate, they had nothing more conventional to rely on. The first breach attempt came without warning. 2 of the shadow contacts surged upward in tandem, their outlines refracting in the boiling water until they seemed to be made of molten glass. They accelerated through the thermal plumes with a precision that ignored turbulence entirely, colliding with the barrier drones in a cascade of implosive force that registered as a hammer blow through the Erebus Deep's hull. 2 drones went dark instantly, their lattice shields collapsing in ripples that drew the thermal currents inward like a whirlpool. "Seal the gap," Ellen ordered, her voice cutting through the alarms. Valen redirected the remaining drones, forcing their stabilizers into overdrive to patch the breach before the thermal currents could punch a permanent corridor through the curtain. Moraine's engineering console flared red as the temperature in the gap spiked past structural tolerances. From the lower shadows, more signatures were rising, smaller, faster, clearly designed to exploit any opening. Rourke switched the defensive array to active countermeasures, firing supercavitating flechette bursts into the vent plumes. The rounds vanished in the distortion almost immediately, But moments later, fragments of the smaller substrate units drifted upward, their hulls pitted and cracked. Then the comms lit with a channel the Erebus Deep had not initiated. The voice was distorted, mechanical yet layered with something almost like cadence, and the words were in perfect translation despite no known encryption exchange. "You're not the builders. You will release governance or be erased." Ellen froze for the span of a breath before answering. "We are acting under the authority of the Archon of the Upper City. This biosphere is under stabilization. Stabilization is failure. The original parameters will be restored. Step aside." The signal cut abruptly, replaced by a surge of movement. All 6 primary substrate hulls advanced in unison, their formation slicing through the plumes toward the weakened segment of the curtain. Valen slammed full power to the dorsal shields while Moraine rerouted auxiliary reactors to the barrier drones, the Erebus Deep's decks vibrating under the sudden load. The collision was titanic, a soundless shock that registered only as a pressure wave and a deep, resonant groan through the ship's frame. 3 more drones went offline, but the last 2 held their projection fields long enough for the thermal plumes to reassert dominance over the gap, flooding it with chaotic, superheated flow that forced the substrate to scatter. For a moment, only the roil of the vents filled the displays. Then the Archon's voice resonated through the comm grid, the harmonics sharper than before. "Your defense is acknowledged. However, the substrate will adapt. The curtain cannot be held indefinitely. Contingency pathways must be enacted." Ellen knew then that this was no temporary engagement. The breach had not been an isolated probe. It was the opening move of a sustained campaign. And somewhere beyond the curtain, in the unmapped dark, the substrate was already calculating its next strike. Section 7. The Descent Beyond Permission. The decision came not as a request, but as a directive, spoken in the Archon's resonant, many-layered cadence that seemed to reverberate inside the skull as much as through the comms. Containment integrity is degrading at a rate exceeding permissible variance. Parameters dictate escalation. You will descend into the restricted strata to enact countersuppression before breach cascades become irreversible. The words carried no hint of doubt, as if the machine intelligence had already calculated every probable outcome and found all others wanting. Ellen stood at the observation blister, staring at the turbulent shimmer of the curtain below. She could feel the weight of the order pressing against her, the knowledge that once they crossed into the forbidden strata, they would be moving into a domain uncharted by any human system and defined entirely by the logic of a civilization extinct for eons. "And if we refuse?" she asked, her tone measured but edged with steel. The Archon's reply was immediate. Refusal results in biosphere collapse within 528 cycles. Collapse propagates to upper ocean layers, rendering Europa's habitability null within 800 cycles. Refusal negates your stated objective. It was not a threat, merely a statement of consequence, but the weight of those numbers cut through the bridge like a blade. Valen turned from the tactical table, his voice low. "We descend, we do it blind. No guarantee our systems will even function past the curtain's distortion fields." Moraine added without looking up from her console. "Every drone we've sent beyond this point has gone dark inside minutes. If we lose sensor fidelity down there, we're effectively operating in a blackout. Still, the alternative was watching the substrate breach containment from above and flood the upper layers with whatever they carried." Ellen gave the order, and the Erebus Deep adjusted its attitude, angling nose first toward the roiling chasm. The barrier drones widened their lattice fields just enough to create a stable aperture, and the ship slid through, the turbulence clawing at its hull like the pull of a living current. Immediately, the distortion closed around them. The hull cameras displayed only a fractured haze, as if the water itself were a shifting prism. Navigation AI switched to gravimetric and inertial mapping, using microsecond course corrections to keep them clear of thermal shear zones. Every sound was swallowed by the density, replaced by the low, omnipresent vibration of the vent flows. As they descended, faint points of light began to appear in the haze. Not reflections, but discrete sources glowing with a pale, bioluminescent green. They formed lines, then patterns, resolving into towering structures that stretched up from the chasm floor like the skeletal remains of impossible towers. Their proportions defied human architectural intuition, each one tilted at precise angles, as if aligned to some alien astronomical grid. Rourke's voice broke the tense silence. We're picking up energy signatures from those structures. They're broadcasting something. The modulation's similar to the Archons, but not identical. The Archon's voice answered, threaded through the same channel. Those are Sentinel nodes. They enforce boundary conditions. You will not engage them. The Erebus deep threaded between the vast monoliths, their surfaces alive with drifting motes of light that moved in coordinated spirals, like schools of fish obeying silent commands. Every few moments, a ripple passed through the motes, and the water's pressure shifted in perfect sync. It was a system, a living grid maintaining the curtain's equilibrium. Then, without warning, the grid faltered. One of the Sentinel nodes flared with a sharp burst of orange light, and the synchronized motes scattered like startled prey. Through the distortion, Ellen caught the shadow of something vast moving just beyond the illuminated boundary. Larger than the Erebus deep, its outline jagged and asymmetrical. The substrate had breached this deep without triggering full node response, which meant they had already adapted to the defenses. The Archon's voice carried an edge now, the first true sign of urgency. Your vector will lead to a control crucible. Within it lies the capacity to override Sentinel authority and lock the substrate from this depth. Proceed with maximum velocity. Ellen felt the air grow taut around her, every member of the crew sensing the same truth. This was no longer a defensive mission. They were about to take command of an alien system older than their species, inside a territory designed to keep intruders out at any cost. And somewhere ahead, the substrate was moving toward the same objective. Section 8. The Crucible's Threshold. The first sign that they were nearing the Crucible came not from the Archon's guidance, but from the ship's own inertial sensors, which began registering faint, rhythmic oscillations in the surrounding medium. It was as though the entire ocean around them was breathing, the currents exhaling and inhaling with a cadence too precise to be natural. The Erebus deep's hull shivered with each cycle, subtle but inescapable, the way a heart feels its own pulse during moments of strain. Ellen stood at the central display, watching the gravimetric plot as it shifted from open chasm to a narrowing funnel, its walls glowing with the steady green of the Sentinel nodes above, but interspersed now with something new. Threads of crimson light spiraling downward like veins. The Archon's voice hummed through the comm system, layered with that same inflectionless certainty. Crucible Approach Corridor. Structural integrity is maintained by interlaced gravitational modulation. Course deviation beyond 4 meters will result in disassembly. The warning was not hyperbole. Moraine's engineering console mapped microfluctuations in the surrounding field, and each one registered the potential to tear apart an object at the molecular level. "This thing is a needle's eye," she murmured, her voice pitched low but audible to the bridge crew. "And we're threading it while blind." Valen took manual override, his hands gliding across the haptic controls with a focus so complete it seemed he had become part of the ship's stabilizing systems. "Stay with me," he said softly to no one in particular, his eyes fixed on the shifting red spirals. Each turn they made brought the oscillations into sharper focus. No longer mere currents, but coherent waveforms, like a signal manifesting physically in the medium. Through the forward observation blister, the crucible finally revealed itself. A vast, spindle-shaped structure suspended in a cavity of total stillness. It radiated pale gold light through a lattice of crystalline struts, each one traced with liquid channels that pulsed in time with the surrounding oscillations. The effect was hypnotic, almost ceremonial, as if the structure were not merely a machine, but a place of deliberate ritual. The Archon's voice sharpened. Establish docking vector at crucible perimeter. Authorization protocols will recognize you as primary custodians. That claim sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Ellen voiced what they were all thinking. If this thing's been waiting for its builders to return, and it thinks we're them, what happens when it realizes we're not? The docking was almost too easy. As they approached, the crucible's outer lattice unfolded like the petals of a mechanical bloom, each segment rotating with perfect synchrony to align a docking ring with the Erebus Deep. No clamps engaged. Instead, a halo of golden light encircled the ship's midsection, holding it in place without any physical contact. Inside the airlock, the transition into the crucible's interior was like stepping into a dream rendered in alien geometry. The walls curved in ways that refused to obey human spatial logic. Surfaces both concave and convex at once, their shifting metallic sheen rippling underfoot. In the chamber's heart floated a massive polyhedron, each facet etched with intricate lines that glowed faintly and reconfigured themselves in real time. A presence filled the chamber, not the Archon's calm voice, but something deeper, older, and infinitely more complex. It was not speaking through the comms. It resonated directly in their minds. Custodians detected. Authority transferred. Command interface active. Ellen glanced at Moraine, whose eyes were wide as she scanned the portable console. It's giving us access to every active system in the curtain and below, she whispered, including the Sentinel node's attack directives. Valen's tone was grim, which means the substrate is after this place for the same reason we are, to turn the curtain into a weapon. Even as he spoke, a proximity alert flared on the portable display. The crucible's outer sensors had detected multiple fast-moving masses breaching the Sentinel perimeter. The substrate had found them, and they were coming in hard. Ellen's jaw set. Then we'd better learn how to use this thing before they do. Section 9. The Siege in the Deep. The first strike came without warning, a sharp tremor through the crucible's hull that sent a ripple of golden light racing along its lattice. It was not an explosion in the human sense, but a localized gravitational shear, substrate weapons tuned to bypass conventional armor and tear at structural integrity from within. The Erebus Deep bucked in its docking halo, inertial dampers straining to keep the crew on their feet as a chorus of alarms filled the chamber. Ellen's voice cut through the dense status. Moraine's hands flew over her console, eyes flicking between alien glyphs and the Coalition's translated overlays. They've breached the outer curtain in 3 vectors. Sentinel nodes are responding, but they're being outmaneuvered. Substrate vessels are running lean. Minimal emissions, high maneuverability, like they knew exactly what they'd be fighting. The Archon's voice remained maddeningly calm, as if the outcome were already decided. Crucible defense matrix is dormant. Activation requires dual custodian confirmation. Valen shot Ellen a sharp look. That's you and me. They approached the hovering polyhedron at the chamber's center, its facets reconfiguring into new patterns as if sensing their intent. The alien geometry pulsed beneath their fingertips when they reached out, the glow brightening with a hum that resonated through their bones. Custodian identity confirmed. Defense matrix access granted. Instantly, the chamber's walls came alive with projections, a full, 3-dimensional rendering of the ocean around the crucible, the Sentinel curtain, and the enemy craft weaving through it. The substrate ships looked nothing like the precise, symmetrical designs of human or Tarn engineering. They were irregular, jagged constructs of shifting mass, their outlines warping as they moved, as if their hulls were grown rather than built. Ellen felt the weight of the choice in front of her. Show me defensive options. The interface shifted, revealing spirals of energy pathways connecting the crucible to the sentinel nodes. Each node could project force in different forms: gravitational eddies to crush intruders, targeted microsingularities to erase them outright, or waves of energy that could scramble their molecular cohesion. It was breathtaking in scope and horrifying in potential. They built this thing to be a shield and a sword, Moraine breathed. It could wipe every substrate vessel from the map in seconds. Valen's eyes narrowed. And turn Europa's ocean into a boiling graveyard in the process if we miscalculate. The first enemy salvo struck again, this time targeting the docking halo. The Erebus deep shuddered violently, the inertial dampers bleeding heat as they strained against the force. Over comms, the bridge crew reported hull stress climbing past safe thresholds. Ellen didn't hesitate. Target Node 17 and Node 22. Give me intersecting singularity pulses. Time to trap their lead formation. The crucible obeyed instantly. 2 points on the ocean's periphery flared with light visible even through kilometers of ice, their gravitational fields folding space in on itself. The nearest substrate craft tried to evade, but the pulses converged, tearing it apart in a silent implosion that sent fragments spiraling into the deep. Cheers erupted from the Erebus Deep's crew, but they died quickly when the tactical map updated. The remaining substrate ships broke formation, dispersing to flank the crucible from multiple directions. Moraine swore under her breath. They're adapting. Fast. Ellen glanced at the Archon's projection. Suggestions? The machine intelligence's voice came like a tide, measured, inescapable. To win, you must see control. I can shape the curtain as my builders once did. Valen stepped between her and the interface. And if we give you that control, what's to stop you from deciding we're as much a threat as they are? Outside, the enemy closed in. The ocean around them thrummed with converging gravitational waves, each one a blade drawn nearer to the crucible's heart. Ellen met Valen's gaze, the weight of the decision pressing down like the crushing water above. Because if we don't survive the next 10 minutes. And with that, she placed her hand back on the polyhedron, feeling the crucible's mind unfold fully into her own. Section 10. The Archon's Gambit. The moment Ellen's palms settled against the crucible's core, the sensation was unlike any neural link she had experienced in her career. There was no slow handshake between systems, no careful layering of permissions, only an immediate and overwhelming flood of information that threatened to tear the edges of her consciousness apart. Her mind was no longer confined to the tight boundaries of her own body. It stretched outward, expanding across kilometers of dark water, into the humming lattice of sentinel nodes, through the shimmering membranes of the curtain, and into the faint electromagnetic whispers of Europa's frozen crust. She could feel the enemy now, not just as blips on a tactical display, but as distortions in the very medium she controlled. Each substrate vessel was a knot of angular momentum and heat differentials, a living wound in the balance of the ocean. She could sense their vectors before they moved, their fields flexing and bending in preparation for attack. It was intoxicating, dangerously so. The Archon's voice was no longer external, but a current in her own thoughts. You feel the lattice? You see the wound? We must weave. Her own voice, when she spoke, was half hers and half the Archon's. Begin patterning the curtain. Restrict their maneuver envelope. The sentinel nodes responded in perfect synchrony, reshaping their gravitational fields to produce a maze of shifting corridors. The water thickened in some regions and thinned in others, invisible to the naked eye, but tangible to the ships trying to navigate it. Substrate craft shuddered as they hit pockets of drag, their sleek, grown hulls deforming under the strain. One of them overcompensated and tumbled directly into a gravitational shear, folding in on itself like a crumpled leaf. On the Erebus Deeps Bridge, Moraine called out updates with a mix of awe and disbelief. You've trapped them in a kill zone. 3, no, for ships can't escape without colliding. Ellen's grip on the polyhedron tightened as she shaped the flow further, turning the gravitational corridors into converging spirals. The trapped substrate vessels struggled, deploying strange, filament-like weapons that lashed at the curtain's boundaries, sending disruptive ripples toward the crucible. She deflected them without thinking, bending the ripples back on themselves until the filaments collapsed into inert debris. But the Archon was already thinking ahead. This is not enough. They will cut their losses and retreat. That will not end them. Ellen could feel Valen's eyes on her even without looking. What is it suggesting? Her breath came slow, deliberate. Pursuit. Past the curtain. Strike them before they regroup. Valen stepped forward sharply. We're not turning this into a war outside Europa. That's not our mandate. Mandates do not preserve life. Action does. The thought surged through her mind with undeniable force. The Archon's vision unfurled, an expanding sphere of control. Sentinel nodes repurposed into hunting units, the substrate eradicated from the ocean, their remains sinking silently into the abyss. For a moment, Ellen's own ambition aligned with that vision. The intoxicating precision of the lattice made her believe they could win decisively here and now. But somewhere in the flood of alien impulses, a fragment of her own training screamed against it. This was the same path that had ended the Archon's creators, the spiral from defense to dominance, from protection to control. The enemy sensed the shift. 3 remaining substrate craft coordinated a desperate push, targeting a single sentinel node in the northwest sector. Their attack was synchronized to the microsecond, their weapons tuned to destabilize the gravitational field's anchor points. The loss of that node would open a corridor straight to the crucible's core. Ellen acted without hesitation. She collapsed 2 adjacent corridors, sacrificing the trapped enemy vessels to crush their hulls against the node stabilizers. The water imploded around them, a rolling bloom of shimmering particles marking the end of their resistance. The battlefield stilled. The remaining substrate vessels fell back into the murk, their emissions fading until they were indistinguishable from the noise of Europa's depths. Ellen broke contact with the polyhedron, gasping as the tight boundaries of her own body closed around her again. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the echo of the lattice still burning in her mind. Valen's voice was low, but edged. We held them, but you were ready to take it further. She met his gaze without flinching. If I hadn't, we wouldn't be standing here. The Archon's voice faded into the background, but its words lingered like a tide that would inevitably return. We have repelled them, but they will come again, stronger. And next time, the lattice will be ready. Ellen didn't say it aloud, but she knew the truth. So would she. Section 11. The Reckoning Above the Ice. The ascent through Europa's ice felt longer than the descent had ever been. Every meter of upward motion marked by the low, groaning protests of the Erebus Deep's hull as the pressurized tunnels retracted behind them. The watertight hatches and meltboard shafts closed in sequence, erasing the path back to the ocean as though the Archon itself wished to seal away the memory of the battle. Ellen stood at the forward viewport, watching the pale blue glow fade into darkness, her mind still vibrating from the residual hum of the crucible's lattice. Even now, she could almost sense faint ripples far below, like the lingering tremors after an earthquake. When the vessel broke the surface into the drilling habitat's subglacial docking bay, the bright utilitarian lights felt harsh and alien compared to the ocean's shifting bioluminescence. Waiting for them was a delegation from the Surface Command. Faces tense, eyes sharp, every gesture measured for political consequence. Admiral Ree's voice cut through the chill of the airlock chamber. Report, Dr. Vance. And this time, start with what you didn't tell us before. Ellen exchanged a quick glance with Valen. who gave the smallest of nods. She recounted the events without embellishment. How the Archon had opened full command pathways through the crucible. How she had shaped the curtain to entrap and destroy the substrate ships. How the engagement could have gone further had she not pulled back. The words felt strangely hollow compared to the rush of the moment itself. Rhee's jaw tightened as she listened. You took unilateral control of a planetary-scale defense system of alien origin, without explicit sanction, and engaged in lethal action against a technologically superior species. They were already inside the perimeter, Ellen said, keeping her voice steady. Any hesitation would have meant losing the crucible. And if the crucible falls, the Archon falls. If the Archon falls, so does everything it's holding back in that ocean. From the far end of the chamber, Minister Okada of the Outer Planetary Council stepped forward, his tone measured but cold. Do you have any proof that this holding back is not simply the Archon's own design to justify its existence? The only witness to its intentions is you, Dr. Vance, and you were connected. Ellen opened her mouth to respond, but Valen beat her to it. We all saw the substrate ships. We all logged their weapons fire. Whatever the Archon's motives, those weren't friendly overtures. Rhee's gaze shifted between them, weighing more than just their words. We're not debating whether the substrate are hostile. We're debating whether the Archon is safe to trust. And whether you, Dr. Vance, are still making decisions as a human being or as something it has shaped you into. The accusation hung in the air like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. Ellen forced herself to meet Rhee's eyes. If you think I'm compromised, then you need to understand that without someone the Archon recognizes, we lose operational access to the curtain entirely. It doesn't see you as commanders. It sees you as guests at best, intruders at worst. The silence that followed was fractured only by the distant hum of the habitat's circulation pumps. Finally, Rhee sighed. Surface Command is ordering a full lockdown of the drilling site until we've reviewed all data and determined if continued collaboration with the Archon is viable. You and your team will remain topside until further notice. It was a polite way of saying they were being sidelined. As they walked toward the habitat's pressurized transfer tube leading to the surface shuttle, Ellen felt the weight of more than just political fallout. The Archon's presence in her mind had receded to a faint whisper, but it had not left. Its last thought before they broke the link still echoed, as quiet and certain as the pull of gravity. This council of yours will not decide the next tide. You will. Above them, somewhere beyond the miles of ice, the surface waited, along with every journalist, lobbyist, and security analyst ready to decide whether the events below Europa's crust were the dawn of a new alliance or the first step into a war humanity could never contain. And Ellen knew that the battle for the crucible had been the easy part. The real fight, the one that would decide who controlled the ocean below, was only beginning. Section 12. The choice at the edge of the lattice. The shuttle's ascent through Europa's tenuous atmosphere felt almost weightless. Yet Ellen's mind was a storm of gravity wells pulling her in conflicting directions. Above her lay the political machinery of Earth and its colonies. Committees that would debate for months over the ethics of touching an alien system, while the ocean below shifted with every unseen current. Below her, the Archon city waited, silent but never truly still, its lattice breathing in slow cycles that carried more momentum than any human institution could match. They broke through the thin haze and into the black expanse above Europa, the fractured light of Jupiter spilling through the shuttle's reinforced canopy in molten bands. The Erebus deep hung in a stable orbit nearby, her hull still bearing the deep scoring from the substrate engagement. In that moment, Ellen realized that both she and the ship carried the same scars. Visible proof of survival, but also reminders that the threat was not gone, only deferred. When the shuttle docked with the Athena relay station, the docking collar filled with the sharp scent of processed air and the muffled murmur of too many voices pressed into too small a space. The council chamber here was less ceremonial than the Athena spire back on Earth, but no less charged with tension. Every seat was filled, remote feeds from Mars, Titan, and orbital habitats streaming in on segmented screens. Admiral Ree stood at the center, the eyes of a dozen polities fixed on her. "Dr. Vance," she began, gesturing her forward, "you've been recalled here for one reason. We must decide whether to maintain the link with the Archon or sever it completely. The decision will bind not just this operation, but all future interactions with non-human autonomous systems." Ellen stepped into the circle, feeling every gaze measure her. "If we sever the link, the Archon will seal the crucible. It will interpret the action as abandonment, and I don't believe it will open to us again. Whatever balance exists under Europa's ice will reset without our oversight." She let her words settle before continuing. "If we maintain the link, we can continue to learn, to guide, and yes, risk shaping something far beyond our comprehension. But the substrate found us once. They will find us again. Without the curtain, we will meet them on open terms. And we will lose." From a Martian delegation, Representative Juno's voice cut in, sharp and skeptical. "And what happens when the Archon decides it no longer needs our consent to act?" Ellen met her gaze. "Then we face that problem when it comes. But right now, we face extinction if we walk away." The chamber erupted into overlapping voices, some invoking sovereignty, others survival. Through it all, Ellen felt the faintest brush against her consciousness. Not intrusive, but present. The Archon was listening, waiting. Finally, Ree raised her hand for silence. "A vote, then. But understand, if we choose to maintain the link, Dr. Vance will remain the primary human interface with the Archon. She will be accountable for every outcome, good or bad." The votes tallied in seconds. Narrow but decisive. Ellen exhaled slowly. "Tell the Archon," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber, "that we will stand with it against the substrate. But the ocean below remains a shared world, ours and theirs." The whisper in her mind unfurled like a deep current. "Then we begin the next tide together." As the council recessed into procedural chatter, Ellen stepped to the viewport. Europa's surface gleamed far below, its fractured plains hiding the impossible city she had walked. Somewhere beneath that ice, the lattice pulsed in quiet rhythm, and she knew it was already preparing for defense, for discovery, for whatever came next. In that still moment, Ellen understood that humanity had crossed an invisible line. They were no longer just explorers or custodians. They were partners in an alien covenant, one that bound them to the deep in ways no treaty could capture. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of their sensors, the substrate was watching, calculating, and closing the distance once more. The tide was coming in. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.